Welcome to Bold Agendas, a series of thought leadership podcasts dedicated to the discussion of transformation management. In each episode, we address a topic of strategic interest to business leaders who are guiding their organizations through transformative change. In today's business landscape, driving sustainable success requires more than just responding to the pressures of growth and disruption. It demands a cohesive vision and disciplined execution. Leaders today face a rapidly changing environment where operational excellence, innovation, and long-term value creation are essential. Building a culture that fosters resilience and adaptability has become a fundamental leadership challenge. Technology, economic shifts, and cross-functional collaboration have created new paradigms where leaders not only are responsible for growth, but for navigating their organizations through unprecedented times. To help me explore these themes today, I'm honored to welcome Dave Cote. Dave is the former CEO of Honeywell, where he led a transformative period of growth and innovation, achieving record profitability and operational resilience. Under his leadership, Honeywell delivered total shareholder return of about 800% over his 16 years, 2.5 times the S&P 500, with a market cap increase from $20 billion to $120 billion, all while maintaining financial discipline and building a performance culture that has become a model of operational excellence. Post-Honeywell and in February 2020, Dave played a pivotal role in taking Vertiv Holdings Company, a data center products company, public through a special purpose acquisition company SPAC transaction. The shares launched at $10 a share and are now $125. And in the last few months, Dave's family's investment firm bought a majority interest in a NASDAQ company, Compost Secure, that makes metal credit cards. Since his interest, the shares have risen from $8 a share at its purchase to about $14 a share now. Known for his focus on long-term results, innovation, and building a legacy that extends beyond numbers, Dave's insights into leadership are both practical and inspiring. In addition to his commercial work, Dave is the author of 2 books, Winning Now, Winning Later, and Being a Leader. And he's an industry speaker and advisor, sharing his expertise on operational excellence, technology strategy, and the importance of financial discipline. He brings a wealth of knowledge on how to lead through economic cycles, build resilient teams, and create a leadership legacy that endures. This promises to be an insightful discussion, and I'm beyond grateful to have Dave here to share his philosophy and experience. My name is Mimi Brooks. I'm the CEO of Logical Design Solutions, a business strategy and transformation consultancy, and I'm a leadership coach. And today we're going to explore the issues of running a conservatively bold agenda, the art of industrial innovation, and the enduring lessons from Dave's transformative leadership journey. Let's get started. Welcome, Dave. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. It's really quite a pleasure and honor to have you here.
You're very kind. It's appreciated.
I have to thank our mutual friend, Brian Marcotte, for introducing us and making the request to have you come on. So I'll do a little plug for Brian, and I appreciate you taking his email on it. Well, Dave, I thought maybe I could start there before I jump into our idea of how you balance and operational excellence with a growth strategy, because that's really the epicenter of what I wanted to talk to you about today. But, in order to get a little prep for this, I looked you up on ChatGPT to see what does it say about you. I just want to tell you this because you might not know it.
No, I don't. That's why I'm curious.
Okay, so let me tell you. It says that Dave's a remarkable leader, an icon CEO in U.S. industry. By the way, I want to tell you, I think that's true. But here's an interesting thing. It said that your leadership style is characterized by integrity, strategic vision, operational excellence, and people development, including workforce and leader development. So my question is,
Wow, that's
as
pretty nice.
that's pretty good.
I'm surprised they didn't say I was demanding also, because I think most people who've ever worked with me would say I can be pretty demanding.
Did not. I don't think that it mines glass door. So I think that that was out. Anybody said it? I think it was out. But my
Funny.
question is, what's funny is there isn't a lot about your background and history on a personal note. And I'm not asking that. What I am asking, though, is what business or life experiences, Dave, in retrospect, gave you some of these leadership qualities and persona that you have today?
Well, I guess one of the ways to think about it, I've been asked in the past about um, who are the leaders who like most inspired me or who that I felt got the most lessons from. And I've always said the same thing. The first time I was ever asked it, still say the same, is uh, biggest role models for me in leadership were my mom and dad. And they only had eighth grade educations. My dad had 6 months. My mom had like 2 days of high school, and but they were really pretty, let's say, thoughtful about life and how you had to handle adversity and what it took to be successful. And not because they'd seen a lot of success, because we lived in a small town, there weren't a lot of people to look at, but it's just stuff like developing independent thinking, which you've probably seen I talk about a lot. And they say independent thinking is a lot more rare than being smart. I mean, my dad used to always say, be a leader, not a follower. My mom used to always say, just because your friends jump off a bridge, you're going to jump off a bridge. Think for yourself. I can tell you, as a kid, it is really irritating to keep hearing that. And by golly, it does stick with you as you and you see your own parents doing it, thinking for themselves because they encourage it so much. And by God, you find out that, geez, you can think independently too. And I always have. And I think it's really, really helped in terms of one of the things that you want to see in a leader. Another one was just having respect for everybody, being honest about everything, admitting when you did something wrong and just speaking up and saying it, having respect for everybody, and how you behave, no matter how far you go up. I remember my dad always used to say, remember, the higher up the flagpole you go, the more they can see your ass. So always be thinking about it.
That's good.
And I mean, just colorful ways of thinking about it. And my dad, I mean, I tell this story. I can remember being 12 years old, and I worked in his garage for the princely sum of 0 per day, which is the way things kind of worked back then. And we were sitting on the curb of the garage, which was highly unusual because that meant there was absolutely nothing else he could think of for me to do, because he was always thinking of something that needed to be cleaned or washed. And so he kept me very busy. And we were just sitting there. All of a sudden, this car comes in, and my dad got up with his normal cheery greeting for the customer. And this guy gets out of his car, older guy, and he just starts yelling at my dad. And I'm looking at my dad. My dad was a tough guy, World War II vet, wounded. He was a tough guy. And I remember looking at it saying, oh my God, I'm going to watch my dad pop this guy. He's just going to let him have it. And instead, my dad just kept saying, I'm sorry. I'll make it right. I'll take care of it. I'm sorry. And I
Oh,
can remember just sitting there. I didn't move him up. I just watched the whole thing. Customer leaves.
wow.
My dad comes back, sits on the curb. And at this point, as you might admit, I'm not saying a word because my dad was kind of like, whatever you, you kept your mouth shut generally.
Yeah.
And I still remember he just kind of looked off wistfully and said, you know, Dave, sometimes in life and in business, you got to put you got to put your pride in your back pocket. And that's all he said. And
Wow.
man, that, I mean, here I sit 60 years later, that story still sticks with me. And, you know, there are those times in life where you just got to make the smart decision and say, okay, I got to eat crow or I got to swallow this, even though I don't want to and I don't like it. But I think about my dad.
Oh, man. But it's a lesson in humility.
Yeah, yeah, it really
Really.
was.
It really was.
And he was, this did not come easy for him. I'll guarantee you that. That did not come easy.
I really didn't know anything about your background in terms of where you grew up and everything, Dave, or your folks. I wouldn't have known that. But I did know that you went to the University of New Hampshire. So did you work when you went through college? Did you
Uh,
did you work? Because I feel like you would have worked through school then. Is
yeah,
that true? Yeah.
yeah. I didn't so much the first 2 years, and instead I just uh, didn't spend any money. I didn't have any money, so I just had enough to go to school, working summers and savings, and what my parents were able to help with. And then the last 2 years, I was actually kicked off of campus. I was not allowed to live on campus any longer. I was called to the assistant dean of students office at the end of my sophomore year and told I wouldn't be allowed to live on campus any longer. And I said, why? Why? What did I do? I still remember she said, it's no one thing. It just seems like wherever you are, there's trouble. You are just a general troublemaker.
Oh no.
And I'm still kind of proud of that today.
Unfairly tried and convicted.
I mean, you can tell I'm still kind of proud of that. It's now, interestingly, she ended up, I actually connected with her like 50 years later, not 50, 40 years later. She was the chief of staff for Senator Judd Gregg from New Hampshire. And well, I mean, it was just kind of this funny connection to make. And she didn't remember me. I, of course, remembered, I didn't remember her name, but I remembered what had happened. So from that point on, I just said, well, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to work nights and go to school days. And that's what I did for the next 2 years, including taking a year off. I quit to be a commercial fisherman with a buddy, which was a whole other story.
Oh my gosh, you are too funny. Well, let me tell you,
Well, like I said, I was pretty much a screw up for most of my early days.
so I think sometimes it's really not that unusual when you see these, really great kind of ops CEOs that, know how stuff works, know how to get things done, blah, blah, blah. They're not always, the Ivy League school people too at the same time. Kind of interesting. You ran a strategy that I think is hard for a lot of people to do, one that balanced operational excellence with innovation. I mean, it's a lot harder to do than to say it, right, Dave? Like, how do those really I see leadership teams struggle with it all the time, especially now with some of the investment choices that need to be made. So what's essential to success have you learned in being able to run a strategy that balances that?
Yeah, I think probably the difference is I've never viewed it as a balance. And I can remember being asked by investors when I first got to Honeywell, so are you going to be a growth company or a productivity company? And I would tell them, yes, the two go
Yes, I
together.
am.
Yeah, the two go together. If you grow, you become more productive, and the more productive you are, the more you grow. And so the two go together. And there's this, the premise of my book, the Winning Now, Winning Later, was this whole idea of success comes from accomplishing two seemingly conflicting things at the same time. And everybody always wants to know, outside, inside a company, all right, what's the one thing you want me to do? It's kind of like that old Billy Crystal movie with Jack Palance, if you remember, where he used to say, it's just one thing.
Oh, yeah.
Figure out that one thing.
Right.
Well, it's never just one thing. It's simple movie stuff. But the reality is, it's always two seemingly conflicting things. So think of it this way. Do you want low inventory or do you want great customer delivery? Do you want people closest to the action empowered to make quick decisions? Or do you want to have good controls so nothing bad happens? Do you want to hire people for open positions quickly? Or do you want to have the absolute best person for the job? Do you want to have growth in your company or do you want to have high productivity? It's always the same thing. You got to figure out a way to do both. Do you want good short-term results or do you want good long-term results? The premise for the book. You always got to figure out how to do both. And that's the approach that I took with Honeywell. Was we were going to grow and we were going to focus on productivity, and the two went together. And I think we kind of proved over 16, 17 years that they did.
So, Dave, is that a lot of balls to put up in the air for some leaders who might have been on your team? In other words, is it a strategy that some leaders struggle with working for someone like you who runs an aggressive strategy on all cylinders? Like, how did you experience that in terms of leadership team adaptability and, what made, a great team, working around you?
Well, I mean, going back to the beginning, like I said, I was surprised that GPT didn't say I was demanding, because that's usually the phrase that gets put in there. And kind of the comments that I would make to people, they would think were just impossible. But I was always kind of struck by this old line. It's got to be at least 50 years old, that says progress is made through the irrational demands of general management. And the scary part about that is it's said in a silly way, but it's true. And you've just got to be able to say, this is the way we're going to think about things. And getting back to, we've talked about incremental boldness. You've got to be able, if you just say, hey, we need to be 10% better, everybody figures out how to make the gerbils just run faster on the wheel. And it just, that's a big stress creator. But if you say something like, no, it needs to be 50% better, product cost needs to be 50% of what it was, cycle time needs to be 50% less, you can't accomplish that unless people totally rethink their world, rethink their processes. And I call that the white sheet of paper exercise. Now, the interesting part is, once people start to do that, they find it fun, because it's remarkable how they can transform their own business, their organization. They end up with something that they're extremely proud to talk about. I'd say the second piece of that is you have to find people who want to do that. And I always said, I want the people who want to go home at night bragging to their spouse and kids about what they got done that day. I don't want them going home and bitching about the benefits, or my boss is a twit, or, I want them going home and saying, oh man, you won't believe what I did today or what I accomplished. And that's true for hourly employees. So this is across the organization. Those are the kind of people that I wanted. And we actually hired for them, including our hourly folks.
So you're saying, Dave, that if we run aggressive strategies like that and we engage people to be a part of it, because that's a big idea, right? To get them to co-create, against seemingly, difficult, if not impossible to achieve outcomes, but they're in the soup, right? They're in the soup, along with the leadership team. And in fact, you feel that with the right people, it was both, I want to say, positively challenging and empowering, maybe.
Oh, absolutely. And I think most people, so we didn't have to have huge turnover in the organization to find people like this. They're generally there. They're just not asked to do it. They're not really asked to engage their brain power thinking about how a process can be better. And I'm a big process guy. As you know, I devote a whole chapter to talking about process. If you start with the premise that every process can be made more efficient, more effective, which by the way is true, and that any business or organization is just a collection of processes, most of them crossing functional silos, and you tell people you're going to have the opportunity to improve your work lives and make things better, it's really surprising how much engagement you get. That they really just, they can't stand sometimes the stupidity of the processes they have to work with, and feel like management leadership are idiots for doing things the way they do. You give them the opportunity to fix it and to come up with a better way to do things. It's really surprising what kind of creativity flows from that.
Can I riff off of that for a minute and see if you think we're talking about the same thing too, or how you think about this? Dave, sometimes these themes of simplification. Let's simplify the question. Let's simplify our approach, makes me a little nutty, to tell you the truth, because I feel like, there's a lot of complexity inherent, necessary, unnecessary, whatever, complexity in organizations today, particularly those that have a strong operational, core, if you will. And I feel like one of the difficult relationship problems that we create with the front line is by, not recognizing the complexity of the processes that they manage for us in running the business, as the point of rationalization. Sometimes the only point of rationalization are the people that have the tribal knowledge to do, what we need to have done, even, I think, to the bewilderment of some of the people that they work for. So just knitting together the idea of people being involved in process redesign, managers' perspectives at times, that it's a simplification game as opposed to taking the complexity head on, so that we can really redesign the work in a way that it works for the front line, and we don't once again have shit roll downhill to
Yep.
them.
You've got it exactly right. And there's this chart I include in my book. I didn't make it up, but I've always liked it. That showed process how we think it works, 5 steps. Process how we'd like it to work, it's 3 steps. Process how it actually works is 11 steps. And nobody really knows the 11 steps overall, because the
Yeah,
people doing the work are doing something and passing it on, and nobody talks to each other. There's nobody in charge of all 11 steps until you get up high enough where they no longer understand all 11 steps. And that's why I'm a big believer in process mapping. You just map the process and find out what happens, and then where's it go, and what
right.
happens there, and then where does it go, whether it's a
Tedious
piece
as it
of
might
paper.
be, right, Dave? Tedious as it might be
Yeah,
to discover it, right? And all the variabilities of it, etc. But it is
yeah.
what it is, whether you want to face it or not.
Yep. And when you get the people doing the work involved with it,
Yeah,
it's really impressive, the creativity that comes out of that. With, well, wait a minute, I don't know why do we do this step 5 instead of doing it step 2, and we could save a bunch on quality issues. And gee, never thought about that. Didn't realize it worked that way. You make the change. Now you have, and I guess the other way I've described it is, if you have 10 people thinking about something versus 100 people thinking about something, you're more likely to make progress if you have 100 people thinking about how to make things better, instead of just delegating responsibility for making things better to just these 10 people. You're just not going to get as many ideas. So if you can engage everybody in your company thinking every day about how to make things better, you just end up in a better place. It's just math.
so, but Dave, isn't that, I love that you said this, isn't that really, the essence of digital transformation? That by connecting the organization exponentially, everybody learning, everybody problem solving, reducing the degree of separation between people to other people, to ideas, to resources, etc. You have the whole organization, or parts of it anyways, thinking about the problems that are the most compelling, to our growth, success, whatever the issue might be. And if we can harness that learning on multiple time scales, I'll call it, people and machine learning, I mean, isn't that accelerated decision making really the promise of digital transformation?
Um, I would say yes, with a significant caveat, and that is every IT system that anybody's ever put in place has been with that same kind of aim, that this is going to make everybody's lives easier. But the problem with every IT system that's ever put in place is that they start doing IT work and typing into the machine before they've done all the process work that we just talked about.
Totally.
And
Totally.
every IT system I've ever seen has been screwed up on implementation,
Yeah.
and ERPs get screwed up everywhere, largely because they don't go through the uh, simplify the process,
Right.
standardize the process, then mechanize the process.
Absolutely.
They don't do it. AI has that same kind of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And everybody just starts AIing stuff because it's AI. We're just going to get the same kind of mess we always did with IT. So it requires some thought. I do believe it's there, by the way. I'm a big
Yeah.
believer in AI. I think it's just the next step in the digital roadmap of this digital age that we're in for at least the next 50, 60 years, and until something new comes along. So it's going to be big, despite what a lot of naysayers say. It's going to be big.
But the lesson, to your point, Dave, if I'm characterizing what you're saying correctly, is that the lesson that we should have learned by now, even with the technology that we've been bringing in as core capability, is that it never was about the tech. It was always about the people. It was
Well, people
always
in
about the
process.
relationships and process, right? People, process,
I always
relationship.
put those two together, and I always say
Yeah.
almost anything you're dealing with, it comes down to people and process. You
Yeah.
focus on people and process, and understanding that, and you're generally going to end up in a better place.
Dave, can I just hang for 1 minute before I move on? Actually, I have two questions, but one, just staying with this cultural idea for just a minute. When you're running aggressive strategies like you've run and you do run, what have you learned engages people, and what have you learned turns them off? How do you think about, culture, change, engagement? Beyond what we've talked about so far? Any other things that you think are important?
Yeah, I would say when it comes to strategy first, in most companies, you need to have uh, kind of management processes in place for three things: operations, strategy, and people. Yet only operations tends to get daily attention. Strategy and people tend to get annual attention. Well, the reality is all three of those need daily attention. So you have to come up with ways to make these more operationally kind of thought process where I got to think about this daily. So with strategy, for example, we'd have our strategy session, but I also had these all day growth days once a month, and we do the same thing in Vertiv, and now we're doing the same thing at Compost, where it's just follow up on the various key strategies that you've developed that you want to make sure get put into place and happen. Because there's a tendency to make a bunch of decisions at strategy time. There's no key questions at the end of it, which is who, what, and when. It's just this interesting idea, and okay, these guys are going to go do it. But by having these monthly growth days, you start to develop the who, what, when on everything. And this is not just an interesting idea that somebody's going to develop someday. No, you got to be prepared to talk about it next month because the boss wants to know exactly what you've done. So you've got to routinize it in a way. You can't just have strategy be this, oh, this is the eggheads do this, and we'll make some decisions, then we'll go and do our jobs like we always do. You've got to find a way of really internalizing how do you approach whatever your strategic decisions were. In the actual strategy discussions, um, I always liked it to be exactly that, a discussion. And there's a tendency in any kind of strategy presentation to have hundreds of charts, piles of charts. And I know we used to have these all day sessions, and I actually had to put a restriction that said no more than 100 charts for the day. And that was
Total for the day, Dave. Total for
for
the
the day.
day.
Now, you would think 100 charts should be enough for anybody. And I picked 100 because they were generating pitches of 200 pages. And I used to think, my God, how much brain power, manpower are we wasting just generating charts? This is ridiculous. So I put 100 on it. And even at the beginning of the meeting, if they had 102 charts, I would say, okay, which two charts are we yanking out of the books? And we're not beginning until we all yank those two charts out. And I was doing it just as a way of saying, you're wasting your time if you're going over more than 100. So we'd have the 100 charts, but one of my requirements was that they have a 3 to 5 page executive summary up front that said, here's what you're going to tell us in the presentation. Then we would spend 4 or 5 hours talking off of that executive summary. And the reason I wanted to do that is I wanted to engage people in thinking. How do you actually think about what the problems were that the business was facing? And interestingly, we'd have, I don't know, 40 people in the meeting, and they'd be looking at it saying, oh my God, it's taken us 5 hours to go through 5 pages. We're going to be here for the rest of the week. And then the rest of the pitch we'd finish in 3 hours. We'd be done with the day an hour early because we talked about it all already. And I didn't need to see all this buffoonery that was in the charts when they'd already explained it and we'd already talked it through. So I think to the extent you can keep it a discussion and not just this mind-bending exercise of racing through charts and evaluating, oh, that's a good chart, that's not a good chart. You want it to be thoughtful. It's got to be thought-focused.
I like the idea of, I feel like what you're saying too is, instantiating strategy into the regular discussion, into the way we work, into the way we talk, and then modeling it, right? It's like model it, rehearse it. So people see, what does it look like when we put legs on it, right? What does it look like when we put Yeah, I like that. Did you have a chief of staff that worked for you, Dave, when you...
No.
I can't imagine you did.
I was,
you would drive a chief of staff crazy.
Well, I always figured it would just be another layer between me and the people actually having to run the functions or run the businesses.
Right.
So I always felt like, oh, why do I need them? Especially when you get email and phone calls. I mean, it's easy enough to do all this stuff instead of just devolving all your action items to a chief of staff who then has to go and tell everybody. And now you've got a layer, and is it being interpreted exactly correctly? And if they got a question, can the chief of staff answer it? Probably not. I just felt like it was a lot of money to generate turmoil.
And you wouldn't have had a COO, not to get too entangled here, but you wouldn't have had a COO either, right? Because you had BU heads. So the BU, head would have ran their business unit, if you will. Yeah.
Well, that, and I always kind of looked at it as the businesses are where the money is made. So why do I want to put another layer between me and where the money is being made? Because corporate in a P&L is all L. There's no profit there. It's all L. So you want to be closer to the businesses. That's where the sales are generated.
Right. But, maybe ChatGPT wouldn't say that you're demanding if you had a chief of staff. I don't know. just. So one question I wanted to ask you, just as I had some firsthand experience here, and when I worked with Brian Marcotte as a consultant when he worked for you. And, Dave, I have to tell you, back when we were doing that, I'm trying to think what year that would have been, in the mid 90s, something like that.
No, not 90s. I didn't get there till 2002. So it would have
2002. Okay. So early 2000s.
Mid-2000s or something, yeah.
So, Dave, you ran a very progressive strategy around healthcare for employees, that to me is very close to an implemented value-based care model now that you still see companies trying to figure out if that's something that they want to do. And part of the program, because I worked closely with Brian on this, was a tremendous program on mental health support, for employees. So I'm just wondering, why did this make the top of your priority list when you were there?
Well, I always kind of viewed our employees as valuable. You
Go
you
figure.
want good employees and you want them motivated, and it's no different. Kind of a I guess a typical or an aside that may prove the point also. Security guards when you're driving into the gate to go to work. I always required all the security guards to smile and wave. And I didn't want them to just be, yep, checking you're okay, come on in, yep, you're okay, come in. Because I wanted employees to feel like we're happy to see you. We're glad you're here. And it's going to be a great day. And I didn't want them driving in and feeling sour first thing because the security guy is kind of a twit. So I wanted all the security people to kind of wave to employees so that employees would be in the right frame of mind because what they do is valuable. Well, I felt the same way on healthcare, that I want employees to get good care because they're valuable. And that doesn't mean you just spend a lot. There's a tendency to feel like, okay, that means you got to spend money. No, you got to be smart about what you do. And that's why you saw us focus a lot on how do we improve outcomes for
Right,
employees with any of the
right,
healthcare work that we did. Because, like anything else, every process can be made more effective and efficient. And that includes healthcare. And there is a lot of dumb money in healthcare. And it doesn't improve outcomes, it just increases spending. And I wanted to be smart about it. Said, okay, money is the resource too. I don't want to just spend money to make me feel good saying, okay, I'm spending a lot of money. I want to spend it wisely and I want to get better outcomes for employees as a result. So that was kind of the way we approached things and the way Brian, ran everything we did on the benefit side.
it was a wonderful program. It really was. Great wellness program, great EAP program, chronic disease management programs, um, first point of care, getting the right first point of care, big part of the philosophy. It was really,
Yeah,
it was so progressive.
it's
Before I
good.
move,
I
go
got to
ahead.
admit, it didn't feel like it at the time because as you start to do some of this stuff, you think, well, it seems kind of obvious. We should be doing this. And I guess it was more leading edge than even I might have realized at the time. But quality
Yeah,
outcomes, I thought mattered a lot.
I think I think it was hugely progressive. I talked to companies who are thinking about it today. I mean, you implemented it, then they're thinking about it today. So I think there's
Interesting.
no doubt. Yeah, very
Yeah.
interesting. Very interesting. Just one question that I have because I haven't done a lot of work in the industrial sector compared to other sectors that I've spent a lot of time in. So my question is, in your mind, is there anything unique about innovation in that sector that you might, feel doesn't really exist everywhere in terms of innovation challenges?
I would say there is something a little different in kind of this digital age that we're in, is that a lot of this so far has been digital to digital, which you can have stuff wrong and it's okay. You just put a patch. I mean, how often do you get updates on your phone? Every week or two, you're getting something that just auto installs at night. But in anything industrial, now you're doing a digital to physical connection and transformation. And when you're doing that, stuff has to work. You can't have software running a chemical plant
Yeah.
that you need to shut down and update uh, the software every night. That's not going to work in a chemical. Stuff has to work. And it's one of the reasons why we got Honeywell on the digital strategy we did, is that we focused only on sectors where we had domain knowledge, because that physical domain knowledge married with digital capabilities where the value was added. And you had to really think about, okay, how can I digitally add value in this physical environment in a way that is going to be very robust in terms of how it works? And that is different, I think, in this physical and industrial area.
I think it is. Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. I'm glad you said that. That's interesting. I want to ask you about M&As, but I just want to say one thing to what you were saying earlier about um, technology not working. Because we haven't considered enough about the business factors, the critical business context that technology is going in. Um, I call that sometimes, Dave, business architecture. That before we bring in, I'm just wondering whether you think that's a reasonable label to give what you're describing as the consideration of business process, business operations, business context, and how it works, in today's environment. That if we focused up front on the business architecture, how it is today, and the to be architecture tomorrow, that we wouldn't have this technology getting in front of the business inappropriately. What do you think? Is that a concept that kind of resonates?
I'm not sure I follow all that. If you're saying that in this kind of new environment where we're going to have digital is going to be at play, we need to think about the total business structure for architecture. If that's what you're talking about, then I would say yes, absolutely. Uh, but I'm not sure I understood it that correctly.
That's how I meant it. That
Okay.
that that is how I
Yeah,
meant
I
it. Yep.
agree with that then. Yeah.
Yep. Dave, what about the work you did over the years with M&A, in terms of M&A as a means of growth? What did you find to be, the big integration issues, particularly related to, people, leaders, culture, that made those successful or payback sooner versus later?
Well, I would say the first thing is to make sure that you're acquiring good businesses. And I always looked at it as at Honeywell, we had, I don't know, you could call it 20 or 25 different businesses. And I always looked at it as I was trying to improve the profile of the company by adding to the growth at the top and letting go the growth at the bottom. So we did like 100 acquisitions, 70 divestitures, total sales change of about 23.5 billion on a company that started at 22 billion. So a huge amount of change. Then if you're adding that kind of growth portfolio, uh, you want to make sure you do a good job of making it part of Honeywell right away, that you're Honeywellizing the business and getting the synergies that you want to get. And integration was fundamental to that. And we found a number of things is one, take it seriously. Two, give it very high level attention. Three, put your best people on it, not the people who have time right now.
Yeah.
And these were a bunch of things that we learned by doing a post-mortem. And I actually created a follow-up for anything where we spent more than 50 million on the deal. They had to have an integration review with me pre-acquisition, then at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and then quarterly thereafter for at least a year, just to make sure that
Oh,
we accomplished everything that we said we were going to. Now, I would like to think that I was brilliantly insightful in all of these meetings and there was significant value that came from that. The reality is, the value came from it being a forcing function
it being what?
because
Say it again. I didn't hear you.
the value came from being a forcing function. Because what that causes is that whole team that's dedicated to doing this and told you at the 30-day review that this is what they would have done by the 60-day review. They don't want to come in the 60-day review and say, God, Dave, we were just really busy. So we never got to it. They find a way to get it done. They also don't want to come in with unaggressive goals because they know I'm going to sit there and say, oh, that's not good enough. And so you just kind of create this kind of drumbeat, similar to what we talked about on strategy. you kind of create this drumbeat of performance because
Yeah.
you know the who, the what, and the when. And the team knows they've committed to what, and they know they've committed to when, and they're going to come in and tell me about it. So the forcing function is real, the big value.
I love the follow up that you're saying, though, Dave, because I just, it seems like such an obvious thing to do, but sometimes I think that, we hyper focus on, day one or something close to day one, and we're not really doing the retrospective, afterwards when, things could still be fixed, the dropped loops could be picked up, whatever analogy you want to use. I think that's really smart.
Well, we found, I mean, there were day one things that we did. So, for example, I was big on change the signs outside the building so that they knew it
Yeah.
was Honeywell, whatever. Change the business cards right away so they knew it was Honeywell,
Yeah.
whatever. And you run into some kind of, I mean, I think it's stupid stuff again where somebody's, well, wait a minute, changing out all the signs, it's going to cost a lot of money. Let's spread it out over time. And I kind of looked at it as, well, what's the cost to losing the mindset of the people? Because we want them to know right away, your life has just changed.
Yeah.
You're now part of Honeywell. And here's because people are prepared for change in the beginning. It's like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen here. And if they go through 6 months of, well, nothing really, well,
Right.
now they become part of the establishment. And changing anything once it's part of the establishment and getting through that organization inertia is a pain in the ass. So start right from the very beginning with, yes, your lives are going to change. The signs change, business cards have changed. This is how things are going to be different going forward. Oh, okay, got it. They're ready. You
Pull the
wait six
band-aid
months.
off. Don't do the waterboarding, whatever analogy you want to use, right? Yeah, because you drip for 6 months. It's, we've been involved in M&A, integration issues
Yeah.
6 months later, 9 months later, and people are just like,
Uh-huh.
they're just dying.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
are because and that's why I was always and I was always very keen on be truthful with them. If one of the cost synergies is that 300 people have to come out of the combined business, you tell them up front 300 people are going to come out of the business. Here's when you're going to know. Here's when we promise to tell you. Here's the process we're going to use. People can deal with the truth. The people who can't deal with the truth are generally the leaders. So one of the things that struck me when I was running a business, I was about 40 years old, and I was very candid about how the business was performing, which was poorly. And everybody, I could see the leadership in the row in front of me were like aghast at how could I tell people this. And when I got off the stage, and I was quite fiery, let's say, in my approach to the speech, I was rushed at the stage, not by my leadership, but by people in the audience who'd been listening to it. And they were running up to me to say, it's about time somebody
That's
told us
right.
the truth. We know things aren't good here. We want to have a job here 5 years from now. What do we need to do in order to make this place better? And I remember standing there going, oh my God. All this time, I was worried that I was going to uh, kind of blow up the place with the approach I was taking because none of my leaders wanted me to do it. And instead, it was just the opposite. It was the leaders who didn't get it and were giving me bad perspective. So I was always a big believer. Be honest about it. Give them a timeline. Let them know this is how it's going to work. Don't let this kind of sort of Damocles hang over their head, wondering, oh my God, is it going to, when do we know? How many people? Are they doing something? Just tell them.
Did you ever wonder as you were like walking on stage whether you should really deliver the message that you had prepared?
Yeah, I got to admit, this is back when I was a 40 and fiery, I guess. And yeah, I guess I was wondering about it and saying this could be one of the biggest mistakes of my life. But quite honestly, I was so pissed off at the time, I didn't care.
There
I
you
just said,
go.
I'm going to do it and I'm taking my chances. And it worked. It worked unbelievably well.
There's this like, you've got to be brave. It's not eluding you that you're going to have to step up and just deliver a ballsy message and let the cards fall where they fall. I mean, that's how it feels,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, pretty much. And I have to say, at Honeywell, I think people would say I was generally very honest about what I thought about how a business was performing, and I would do it publicly, in front of all of us, like the top 300 people. But you can also deliver it with a sense of humor on some things about how are they doing and why do they continue to screw something up, and that helps a lot. It doesn't all have to be. You can tell people the truth without being nasty about it.
Yes, yes. Well, I have to say that, that sounds like a small thing. I think that's an art. I think delivering that message with credibility, but as you said, everybody's still whole in the audience. We can all hear it, right?
Yeah.
Is a big idea. Dave, what I didn't get to talk about too much is some of the questions that I had prepared around, financial discipline. But maybe I'll go here with it instead to kind of give you some time back. Um, you know, Fiscal responsibility, both in the work that you did as a CEO, but I don't know if people understand other places in public service, and advocacy where you've also brought, your fiscal perspective, around discipline to bear. For example, the work you did on the National Commission for Fiscal Responsibility and Reform, and other efforts to address the national debt, et cetera. When I look at some of the work you've done outside of your business work and the commissions and otherwise that you've had involvement on, how might you get involved in anything like that in the next 10 years, Dave? Is that an interest of yours going forward? Because it's certainly a strong capability. And obviously, you've got a huge credibility there. So
Well,
I want to vote that you do something with that. I'm wondering what kind of problems you might be interested in solving over the next, 5, 10 years, and if any of this is a part of it.
well, it's nice of you to say. I'd have to say I don't mind being an advisor and getting involved where I need to provide a perspective on things. And I know a lot of people thought when I retired from Honeywell that I would go into politics because I spent a lot of time with politicians and on political issues. But I'd say one of my learnings about myself is that I don't think I would ever be a good politician because I don't have the patience for it. I mean, the stuff that these guys work on can take months and years and sometimes never happens. And I like seeing the problem, developing the solution for the problem, having the problem worked on, and seeing progress on the problem. And that's business. That's why I like it so much. I like building stuff. As a kid, I liked playing with Tinker Toys and Erector sets and building stuff. I just enjoyed it. And I enjoy building businesses. And I can actually see the impact of what I'm doing. I could see it in Honeywell. I could see it at Vertiv. I'm going to be able to see it at Compost Secure. And that's where I get my jollies. And to just kind of work on stuff and argue with other people about, I don't think I could do it.
Are you going to write another book?
I've written two, and that's been enough. I got to say, it's one of those where you do it for the psychic reward, because financially running businesses is a lot better. I'm glad I did it. The emotional kind of benefit of it, the psychic reward has been tremendous. And hearing from people that were in the business, like Brian Marcotte or other people I knew who would say something like, "Wow, I had no idea you were going through that at the time, or that this was your thought process," and it was fascinating to see it. It was just quite rewarding. And we made a lot of happy people. As you know, we created 2,500 401k millionaires, and 95% of them were below what we would call the executive level. And the lowest paid millionaire was making 43,000 bucks a year and became a millionaire because of his 401k program. He just put all his money in the company match into Honeywell stock and just left it there Guy's making 43,000 bucks a year and became a millionaire. I said, okay, if that's not the best advertisement ever for business and what business can do, uh, it made me feel pretty good, given that someday I'd hoped that I could make 43,000 bucks a year when I first started.
I was going to say that, I made a note for myself that was so much in line with what you're saying. It was, how much wealth has Dave created, for stakeholders, employees, everyday stakeholders, not just, our big shareholders. And, how many jobs, Dave, how many jobs, have you created as, Honeywell went from 20 billion to 125 billion, under your tenure. It's I love it when we see issues from the front line. For me, I love seeing things from the front line.
Yeah.
It just matters the most, right? The exponential impact, the lives that you changed, the families that, you made all the difference. It's a huge, huge legacy. I would think one of the most satisfying.
Yeah, it does make you feel pretty good, especially like I said, when you get notes from people because you retire and think, okay, well, I'm gone now, so everybody forgets me. And getting the kind of notes that I still do, because I'm on LinkedIn and I'll get this out of nowhere. Somebody sends me a note and I'm just like, oh man, well, you just made my day. Thank you very much.
Dave, this was so delightful. I can't tell you, the fantastic, lessons learned here. And it really is a thrill for me to have had the opportunity to talk to you. You made my month.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you, Amy. And I enjoyed the discussion.